Here's a recap of the complex storm that moved across the Midwest February 2nd, February 3rd, 2022. Just a couple days ago, yesterday and today. This recap is not the final recap, for many cities are still receiving snow as we speak, but it is based upon plenty of information that's already available, and it is something which I feel requires an explanation, because the original forecast was forecasting much higher snowfall amounts. It certainly appeared to be, and I just wanted to explain exactly what happened over here. Let's start off from the beginning. A low pressure system, a strong storm system, I would say, up in the southern Canada area was responsible for bringing down very cold air into the United States. That, along with a high pressure system, I don't know what came first. It's like asking the chicken or the egg. But the two together, the polar vortex also played a role in this, but I don't have clarity on that. But that was a hot topic several days ago, and that was going to determine how far south some part of the polar vortex or some connection to the polar vortex, which was coming in Hudson Bay, how far south that went was going to determine how far south the storm track went. That was no longer discussed from a couple days onward. That was in the very beginning. But we go, the storm system up had tons of spin on it, 29.3, it strengthened to 29.2. 29.2 is the type of low pressure system which very great forecasters and AccuWeather say that's the criteria a lot of times they use to determine whether the nor'easters will be getting 12 inches of snow or more. Will this storm be a foot or more? Is the barometric pressure 29.2? If not, if it's 29.3 or higher, it's unlikely that you will see 12 inches of snow. So this is considered a strong storm system. The effect it had on us is that it brought down the cold air, and it created this front, which was huge. A front that went all the way from the Hudson Bay to Texas. The system continues to move. I don't know how fast it's moving, but the system appears to be moving quicker than the front is moving, and that seemingly is because the front is getting longer and longer. It's extending like a rod. Now, we have this cold front. It's connected to 29.2, but to a low pressure of 29.2, but it's not that low pressure which is responsible for the snow that came our way here in the Midwest. Therefore, that 29.2 would not be a number to look at when forecasting 12 inches of snow. 12 inches of snow was forecasted. We can say the word certainly. It really was. By many forecasters, there was forecasted to be 12 inches of snow, and there was for many locations, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So there, in fact, forecasts indicated 1 to 2 feet for many areas, Springfield, Illinois, South Bend, Indiana. Even if you look at the AccuWeather for days, 1 to 2 feet of snow, and part of this was very well advertised and very reasonable. In fact, even last Thursday, just plain weather maps advertised at least one out of the three main ingredients necessary to produce a major winter storm was well advertised, even on plain newspaper weather maps last week. You saw copious amounts of Gulf moisture. You saw precipitation all over the place in the Gulf of Mexico going into Texas and then moving up north, and that's actually exactly what we had. We even saw flash flood watches issued for Texas. All of that precipitation, the moisture coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, there's some other word, along the front. The front was like a conveyor belt for all of this moisture. So you have all of that, you have tons of it, all of it's going along the front. Another way to word it is that there was a narrow strip of Gulf moisture, but that that's deceptive, because maybe a narrow strip, but it was well known where this strip was, and it was along the front, which was it was the perfect location to produce a winter storm. So we have that. We have the three ingredients are low pressure. I think it's deep low pressure, and also we have the Arctic air, and we have the copious amounts of Gulf moisture. So, and usually the major winter storms here in the Midwest, that's enough to produce a 6-inch plus snow and to have a 6-inch plus snow forecasted. Due to the higher amounts of Gulf moisture, it seemed reasonable last week to go ahead and say that parts of this country will be getting 1 to 2 feet. And that's what I said on my podcast. It sounded very reasonable. And that was true. I mean, but we still have something to explain over here. Okay, now we come this week. This was originally advertised to be a winter storm. You know, these winter storm warnings, when they cover a time period, it's looked upon as one winter storm. It could even be that in the beginning, it really was looked upon as one winter storm. Despite the science that was going into it of 2 different waves of low pressure, it appeared that many locations would just have continuous snowfall, even in between the waves of low pressure. So it kind of was, in the beginning, one winter storm, or it certainly was. That's how it was publicized. Nothing certainly, as we've said. It was as one winter storm. Now, that's... So you have 12 to 24 inches in the bullseye. As time went closer, it became clear that what's actually happening is we have 2 waves of low pressure. And these were going to be classic waves, nothing special. But it's special because of what it is. It's a panhandle hook storm. It's a low pressure area developing. You could see it in Oklahoma, Texas, and Louisiana, that area. It's not exactly the classic thing that we have. The classic thing is we have like a storm system. The classic thing is exactly what happened just north of Minnesota, to have something like that, to have that storm down here, that system all the way down here, have a front coming from that system down here, an organized, intense low pressure. That would be the whole system, and the meteorologists have to deal with the storm track, which is very complex always. And snowstorms, it's very hard to forecast. This one has 2 waves of low pressure, each which were riding along this front. Each wave of low pressure initially appeared to be taking the same storm track, more or less, because the front was going to be stationary. But as the front started to move southeast, it became clear that the second wave of low pressure was going to be moving south. It's going to be moving along the front, just like the first wave of low pressure. But the front is not going to be it's not going to be completely stationary. Even if a front moves 5 miles per hour a day, it's still considered halakhically stationary. At the 5 mile per hour, I think that's the cutoff. The front moved southeast and continued to move southeast. By the time the second wave of low pressure was ready to move along that front, the front was already significantly further south, to the point that I don't think there was even one city that ended up being in the bullseye for both systems. Each system, again, in the Midwest, it's a classic weather map for these panhandle hooks, for these Gulf moisture storms. 6 to 12 inches at the bullseye, and it goes to 3 to 6, 1 to 3, and you just have to figure out. You have to figure out, is your city going to be in the 6 to 12 inch range, the 3 to 6 inch range, or the 1 to 3 inch range? That's what you have to do. We have 2 waves. Each wave has the 6 to 12 inch range, 3 to 6, and 1 to 3. Wave number 1 was well forecasted in Illinois. There was high confidence in the forecast for areas south of Chicago, medium confidence in Chicago. Regardless of the confidence, the forecast didn't materialize. I think you could say they lucked out. The forecast materialized and things happened. Even though they didn't have the confidence for Chicago and areas north, the things materialized. South of Chicago, they got around a foot. As you'll see, storm totals 10 to 14 inches. The highest amount was 14.5. In the city, Lakeview got 9.5. Midway Airport actually got a little bit more than 10 inches. That might have really been the most. And then you go into O'Hare Airport, got half of that there north of the city, 5.6 inches. And then parts in the northern areas got under 2 inches of snow. The other thing that was forecasted is a sharp cutoff. And that's what you see happen, to go from less than 2 inches in the same metropolitan area to 10 to 14 inches. That's a sharp cutoff. Those things are very difficult for meteorologists to forecast, and it's a pain, and it a lot of times turns into a big embarrassment. The reason, because you have cities which are forecasted to get 6 inches, they wake up and there's nothing because the storm was slightly different, took a slightly different path than what was forecasted. The reason for that is because of that strong Arctic high. You have very cold air. It can hold no moisture, very little moisture, because the air is so cold. The water molecules shrink, coldness shrinks, and you just can't hold much. So the air is very dry. Very dry air causes precipitation to evaporate. When snow evaporates, it's actually called sublimation. It's not called evaporation, but that is just a technical terminological issue over there. So we have sublimation. Even in heavy precipitation, if it's falling into dry air, much of it, maybe even all of it's going to evaporate. That explains the sharp cutoff. So as that high pressure was getting really close, it was getting really close. So you have very dry air, so you have that sharp cutoff. So the areas which were getting snow, it was snowing heavily, even 1.5 inches an hour Wednesday morning. Some people reported that they were barely able to see even Wednesday afternoon in places like Evanston even, which I have reason to believe they only got 5 inches of snow. So that's what you have. And wave number 1 was well forecasted for Illinois, for the cities, the snow cities. The areas, the ice storm part of it, I really don't know. That's a complex part, and I don't know. When you go into Indiana, it was also well forecasted for much of Indiana. I don't know exactly how much, because there was a portion of Indiana which it was not well forecasted because of another complication. They got the storm track right. They got the cutoff point right. Those are major things. They got those right. Those are challenges, and they got those right. But there was another thing that got messed up, and it only affected certain cities. That is something which, in this case, was another unique part of the storm. The fact that in the storm's bullseye had the precipitation starting off as rain before the actual cold front moved through. The precipitation started off as rain. Even in the Chicago area, we had warm air that the storm system brought in. Temperatures even hit 50 in parts of Chicago Tuesday. The rain overspread the area. It changed over to snow. In Chicago, it was no, I don't think it was a big deal. Just the precipitation changed over to snow, and that was that. And the snow accumulated, and whatever the reports say, that's what it was on the ground. That's what. Okay, you go into Indiana, it's a different story. I think it might have to do, there's two things it might have to do with the timing of it. The fact that it happened during the day, it could be that some of the February sun does affect ice accumulation of freezing rain on roadways. It's an unbelievable chiddush that even when it's 32 or lower in the month of February, even up here in the north, it's difficult for freezing rain to accumulate on the roadways. Whether the sun could affect the precipitation type and delay it, I don't know if it could do that or not. I question that. But what we do have is that the front, Mistama, went slower than what was originally forecasted. I mean, that front is complicated. The speed of the front is complicated because it at one point seems like it went faster. But the cold air, either way, it also has to do with the depth of the cold air. The cold air, the depth of it, the cold air that was necessary to make that transition did not arrive in many of those cities in time to do so, and what added to the problem is the fact that these were cities which were actually in the bullseye of the storm, or close to it. So you had cities which were forecasted to get high snowfall amounts from wave number 1, and again, wave number 1, it's 6 to 12, 3 to 6. These are cities that were forecasted to get 3 to 6, perhaps even 6 to 12, and it did not materialize. They got less, in fact, even much less, probably in the 1 to 3. I would have to do more research in regards to that. But you had plenty of Indiana where the changeover took place on time and things went well. For the northern northern area. Really, all of this is kind of in the northern half of the state, but the northern half of the state, things went well. A little complication over there, the fact that the final snow totals are a little bit more, a couple inches more than what's probably on the ground, because in Indiana, it's likely that a couple inches melted during the whole process. So when they're measuring the amount of snow that's falling, they do it every 30 minutes, and then they empty the bucket. So it doesn't show up in the official recording stations as any snow melted. But there have been times, I know here in Chicago, they said 9 inches fell, but there was only 6 inches on the ground. That's because temperatures were above 32. Chicago also, there was a part of the storm where temperatures were above 32. So to a certain extent, that must have happened. It doesn't look like it happened, but it must have happened to some extent here in Chicago as well. But it happened to a larger extent in Indiana. That I believe that based upon someone I was in contact with in Indiana, and I read about this as a possibility of happening beforehand from the National Weather Service of a different city. So you have the accuracy was higher in Illinois. That's the snow part of Illinois. Again, the southern part of Illinois was dealing with an ice storm, and I don't know what happened over there. But in Indiana, there also was a lot of accuracy. But there were some areas where there was a mess up. That's wave number 1. Okay, now we go into wave number 2. Wave number 2 is the same deal. 6 to 12 inches at the bullseye, then 3 to 6, then 1 to 3, and stuff like that. Wave number 2 was a mess up. Okay, unless you only count forecasts that are happening right before the storm arrives, which even then, that's tzarech ian. We need to see what happened when all is said and done. But there were originally the cities which were in the bullseye for number 1 were going to be the same as number 2, more or less. So you have a city like South Bend of 12 to 24 inches. But at the end, so it became clear that wasn't going to happen for South Bend. So amounts were lowered. South Bend only getting 3 to 6 for wave number 2. Then South Bend only getting 1 to 3 for wave number 2. Then South Bend getting nothing from wave number 2. Okay? So wave number 2 was a mess up that was nicker. It was recognizable, a clear recognizable mess up, unless you discredit forecasts that are made right before the storm. The question is, how far back do you want to go before you can judge a forecast as being inaccurate? Now, this whole thing deserves an explanation because, as pointed out in the very beginning, it was advertised as one storm. And if you look upon it like that, so you end up a storm which was forecast to bring 1 to 2 feet, and you have people waking up and there's only 8 inches on the ground in South Bend, which even if there would be the county that South Bend is in, there were places that did register more than a foot. But even so, there's not a foot on the ground. And even the 1 to 2 feet, it really, the real forecast was higher than 12 inches. Just the real forecast was somewhere in between 12 to 24. Higher amounts, 15 inches, would sound more reasonable. So the wave number 2, the storm track was messed up. I feel this is important to point out because it's important to know what forecasters know and what they don't know. And to realize that on one hand, there was an amazing job done, absolutely amazing. As it's always been amazing to me how these computer models and days in advance are able to know what's going to happen. These storms haven't even developed yet. They're out in the Pacific Ocean already. Last week it was known that something was going to happen. And then so many things went right. But all it takes is a couple things and the thing is a bust. So it's unfortunately what's nicker to the eye is hezek. Nicker she'eno, what is it? Hezek she'eno. Hezek she'eno nicker. There's a machlokas. It's shmei hezek, not shmei hezek. This is accuracy she'eno nicker. Accuracy that's not recognized. I'm using some Aramaic words here, but accuracy that's not recognizable to the human eye. Could we call that accurate or not accurate? Sometimes the actual forecast is a total bust, but there ends up being the exact amount that was forecasted. Just the way it happened was completely wrong. It happened in a completely different way. So it's only known to meteorologists that they completely messed up. But the bottom line is they said 6 to 12. There was 6 to 12. And why was there 6 to 12? Because a surprise lake effect thing happened. The actual storm totally missed or fell apart. But they ended up getting 6 to 12. Is that called accurate? I see. So to me, that's not accurate. But nobody knows about it. To everybody else, they think it's accurate. Over here, you have people that could easily, and it's defendable, why they would think that the amounts were, that they just messed up. But I just want to point out that really the vast majority of this was accurate, and wave number 1 was well forecasted. Wave number 2, again, it took a track that was further to the south. We have cities that got 14.5 inches that I saw in Indiana, 13.8. This is as of this morning. We have to see what happened. I know there was an additional 5 to 10 inches forecasted for today in central Indiana. That was the National Weather Service. They had even an 8 to possible 12-inch parts as well. I think the 12-inch would be more localized, but more of a 7 to 10-inch widespread, which was being worded in the forecast as 5 to 10 inches. And I thought, so this is 10 minutes shorter than the other one. There was a major ice storm, and that's still ongoing. It's a dangerous situation. A 1/4 inch of ice or more is winter storm warning criteria. 6 inches of snow within 12 hours is winter storm warning criteria. 8 inches within 24 hours is winter storm criteria. We could discuss the National Weather Service issued a winter storm warning for Chicago. Now, here's the interesting thing about that, is that, so the O'Hare Airport was under a winter storm warning, but they did not get 6 inches. They got 5.6. Okay? So you could say they failed. There should have only been a winter weather advisory. However, the driving reflected a warning. The driving was not good. And I don't know why it seems like the plows did not do as good of a job as they usually do. So the truth of the matter is, I think it was deserving of a warning. It had the travel impact was intense. Also, the snow was falling down. It was the timing of the snow and the quick rate at which it fell down. Even if there would have been 4 inches, this would have been deserving of a warning. It fell down during morning rush hour Wednesday. The snow rates were reaching 1.5 inches an hour. Visibility was down. It was very difficult. It was a warning type of driving situation, a winter storm warning. With that, we've been talking for 22 minutes, and I'm looking forward to hearing what the final recap of this whole system is. We'll find out tonight or tomorrow. And for right now, there's more to talk about on the East Coast. If I still have on the previous podcast, you could listen then. Listen to that maybe. Everyone have a wonderful night. Thank you for listening if you made it through this far. If you have, you're a true weather buff, and you probably even have some more nuances to add to this. I would love to hear from you. I heard that it's very hard to comment on these things because you have to sign in, you have to do all this stuff. But if you could figure out how to do it, I would love to hear. Just please be respectful and have a wonderful night. We'll put on some real fun music if I have some, and let's go with that.